students, welcome to this module on JSTL and EL. This is the first part of the module. We will be having this JSTL and EL being covered in two modules. Okay. In the earlier modules, in the previous modules, we have been looking at JSP, the various kinds of elements going into a JSP. When we started by covering the scripting elements, the basic scripting elements like scriptlet, expressions, declarations. Then we had seen about the standard tags, action tags which can be included, fine. And then in the last few modules we had seen about the use of a custom tag. You can build a tag library and then you can use your own, you can create your own custom tags and then use them in this library. Okay. So, yes, we have this tag library which you can create on your own and then include tags from that, but then we have some project from, there was a project from Apache about a set of tag libraries which could be commonly be used, and later on they called it as Java standard tag library. So, there is one Jstl which is a project from Apache, and in this mainly the subsequent module which we are going to have is mainly going to cover the tags which are most commonly used from that standard tag library. Okay. Along with that, as you can see, there is another thing which are not only tags, we have something more which can also be included in a JSP page. This is some, from JSP 2.0 onwards. From JSP 2.0 onwards, you can always use what we call as an EL or an expression language. So, another new component which another new thing which can be used within a JSP is the expression language. Let us first talk about this expression language and then we will move on to the JSTL. The two are linked, fine, because the JSTL and EL are very much linked to each other, because it is in this JSTL we have got lots of these tags in this library, and most of these tags use dynamic attributes. They have lot of dynamic attributes, and for these attributes the expression language is something which is very commonly a handy tool to be used there, fine. So, let us try to understand what is this expression language about. So, in expression language, yes, the syntax for an expression language is nothing but, if you want to include in any JSP, you can put this dollar braces, and within braces you have an expression. So, dollar and in braces you can write an expression. So, that is what we call as an EL, expression language. Okay. So, now in JSP you can also include a expression language. Okay. Now, what is this expression inside my expression language? When I say dollar braces and then said, oh, within braces I can use an expression. Okay. This expression, the syntax for the expression is saying you can have an identifier over there. What is allowed here? Any Java identifier. The syntax, its syntax file is any Java identifier. What is most commonly used here? What is available to this expression language? In the expression language, to make things much simpler, instead of starting to use those JSP colon use bean and then having to write those JSP colon get property, those kind of things. Oh, we do not even need any of those things, we do not need them anymore, we do not need JSP colon use bean and then saying JSP colon get property. Any bean, any attribute available in any of the scopes can directly be used. Okay. But yes, of course, that whatever the name of that attribute, fine, that name of the attribute available in those scopes should be a valid Java identifier. It should follow the syntax of a Java identifier, then it can be used in your expression language straight away, fine. There are, okay, so we have identifiers, okay. Not only in this you can use those as identifiers, we use those the various attributes available in those scopes, that is something which you can directly use, the objects available using which are there available as attributes in your any of those 4 scopes. We understand what are those 4 standard scopes: the page scope, the request scope, the session scope and the application scope. So, any attribute available there, you can get hold of it by straight away using them inside your expression. So, dollar braces, no, you do not need to put them in double quotes, straight away whatever is the name of the attribute, provided that attribute name is a valid Java identifier. Fine. Okay. So, that is something which can be done straight away. So, that is something which you can use in your expression. Another thing which is available for use in the expression is we got some implicit objects which any expression language can use. So, we got a set of implicit objects, we will be referring to those objects, we will be listing out what are all those objects later on, fine, but that is something which can also be used here. Okay. So, expression language, the expression in my expression language can be a identifier. Then along with this you can also make use of operators. Fine. There are operators, those standard operators which we normally have. We have those arithmetic operators. Fine. So, you can use those plus, minus, multiplication, division. Okay. So, plus, minus, multiply, that star, asterisk and a slash for the divide. Now, again because of the slash being used so much in HTML and it has its own usage in HTML, right. So, because of that reason another form of this operator is available. Instead of saying slash, you could just say div, fine, you can use that also, fine, that may be more convenient, fine. So, that it does not make fine, it should require some escaping to be done, okay, fine. And then the modulus operator. So, either you use percentage or you can also write MOD, fine. So, that way we have those arithmetic operators, fine. So, you can in your expression you can use identifiers and then you can have them, you can also start making use of the operators, and one of those set of operators is the arithmetic operators. Okay. Now, find arithmetic operators, we know how to use them, fine, and other than these arithmetic operators, yes, what else we can use? We can use the other kinds of operators. We have operators which are the logical operators. Okay. Which are the logical operators? We have the operators called AND. So, you use double ampersand for logical operator, double pipe for the or you can even write AND, OR, fine, those are also substitutes available for these, okay, fine, and or, fine, and then you can also use not, the exclamation, or you can say not, fine. There is one more unary operator called empty. Empty can be used for testing if a particular variable is available, and if it is available, fine, if it is of type string, if it is a null, or if it is just a empty string, fine, those kind of things can be tested with the help of empty operator. So, logical operators, their return value is always going to be Boolean type, fine. We even have another category of operators. We have those operators for comparison, fine. So, we have this less than, or you can say LT, greater than, or GT, fine, EQ or double equal to sign, fine, not equal to, that is NE or not equal to, fine. So, these are the other fine, these are the other kind of operators available here. Now, there are two very important operators and very commonly used here in the expression language. One is the dot and other is the square brackets, fine. They are used for accessing the member of the object, fine. We access the properties of the members by using the dot operator, or instead of dot you may even use the square bracket. Square bracket is more general and has much more usage than just going for a asking for a particular property of the object, fine, or particular member of an object, fine. Yes, we use them even for, so if you have some kind of a Java bean object, let us say you have a object of a class, let us say we have a class called name, fine, and name class has let us say it has separate instance variables for first name and last name. Okay. So, if you have name class having first name and last name, you would have those methods called get first name, get last name to access those methods, to access them, and therefore, we have properties. We will say first name and last name become the properties of name. Now, let us say this name, fine. You have an attribute, let us say in one of the scopes we have some attribute called we have some attribute called of a type called person, fine. So, we may have another class called person, and person has one of the property as name. So, there is a getName method in class person, and now maybe you have a object as object of type person, maybe the name of the attribute is John. So, you have said okay, I have got John as a attribute name, where it is an object of person, fine. And we understand that once you have a person, the person has a name and name has first name and last name. Okay. So, it should then be possible for you to use this dot operator, fine. How we use the dot operator here is, we will say dollar braces and then we can say John to get hold of the attribute object, fine. We get them by name, but you do not have to put in double quotes, fine. So, dollar braces John dot name, because John has a method called person has a method called get name. Therefore, you can just say name dot name in turn has the method called first name get first name. So, we can say John dot name dot first name. That is how you can get hold of the first name of fine. So, this is like trying to access properties, and within property if there is a sub property, even that can be accessed by using this dot operator, fine. So, this is something very commonly used, fine. When we design a JSP, fine, in a JSP if you are following that MVC pattern which we have seen earlier, you would be having objects, so many objects as attributes, and the JSP's job is to just render them, right. So, when it is trying to render them, we have these objects available, and these objects would have their properties, and what we are displaying, what we have done is a JSP is just like a template in which there are places where you will be interested in displaying certain values from the object, fine. So, any of the properties of the object which has to be displayed, or they have a sub property, all that can very easily be done, fine. We do not have to now write too much of, we do not have to go for expressions or fine, or even writing any kind of scriptlet, or all that needs to be avoided, fine. We can just make it very simple and dollar braces and just pick up the object, and we do not even have to think about putting it as a string in double quotes or something like that, fine. So, that way expression language is quite simple, and yes, dot is one, fine. Dot is one very good operator which is available for getting access to the members and to the property of an object and sub properties also, fine. And okay, so that is one thing, fine. That is a dot operator. The other very important operator is the square brackets. Square bracket, as I had mentioned, it is much more general. Yes, square bracket can also be used for accessing the property. It can be used for accessing property. How do we use it for accessing a property? Okay, we should be knowing the property name. If you know the property name, so for example, in this case, suppose I have got John dot name. Now, in name I am interested in the property called first name. So, I will say John dot name. Now, instead of saying first name, I have the other option, I can say square brackets, but then I will have to use double quotes in which I will say first name of the property, fine. So, one use of square bracket is, yes, I can pass a string to give a name of a property of the object and fetch that. So, that is where we use we can be using a string type in the square bracket, fine. In the square bracket, if I am having an array type, yes, we can always use this to access the elements of an array by giving the index position. If you find, so if you got a object of an array type, there again we can simply use our array operator, fine. This is our square brackets. So, in square brackets, yes, you give the array indexes just like we use it normally in Java also. But another one, lists, even lists. For list we understand they are all ordered, list is an ordered collection. So, in our list object also, if we would like to use, yes, we can also use those index positions. So, there what is expected, no, you are not giving in double quotes, you are giving this value as numeric integer type, fine. So, what is expected here is integer type, and yes, you can use those integer types here, fine. So, you can give 0, 1, 2 and all those things. Index position for accessing the element from a list also, similar to accessing elements from a array. Or not only this, you could have anything being used here. This array can also be used for accessing the members, the value from a map, fine. We know what is a map. Map is nothing but a key value pair, a set of key value pairs. So, if you know the key, you should be able to get the value object for it. Okay. Key can be any type, fine. So, here if you got a map, if anything is of type map, fine, you have that map object dot, no dot, sorry, you have to use square bracket, and in square bracket you specify the object. Now, this could be the type, this should be the type which is nothing but the key type, same as the type for the key. So, if you give that key, this will be able to get you the corresponding value for that key in the map. So, accessing members from a map is also something very easily done by using the square bracket, fine. So, square bracket is much more general, much more versatile, fine, but of course, dot is also very convenient to use, fine. So, we have these two operators dot and square bracket, fine. So, they can quite easily be used, fine. So, that's the kind of things which we can use in our expression language. Okay. Now, coming to what else? So, we have identifiers, we have got operators, fine. You can always use the literals, fine. For expression language, you can always be using literals. So, you have literals. What are the literals you can use? We have all the literals, like we have the null, we have the literal true and false for the Boolean type. We can use literals of type string, we can use literals of type floating point. Floating point means, yes, you will be using them as of type double, not the float, do not put that f there, fine. And again int only, do not put L or the long type, you will have integer type only available as literals. So, that is something which you can use in your expression language, fine. So, that is what goes in a expression language, okay. And those implicit objects, fine. Now, let us talk about the various kinds of implicit objects which are available to us in our expression language, fine. So, in our expression, fine, implicit objects are available. So, which are the implicit objects? We have implicit objects, most of these implicit objects, okay, except for one of them, all of them are of type map, okay. So, let us start with the first one of them. We have a implicit object for many times you are interested in knowing cookies, right. So, we have an implicit object called cookie, fine, lowercase c, fine, it is all fine, cookie, it is not plural, okay, simply cookie. So, cookie is nothing but a map object which is available, it is an implicit object, fine. So, if I want to get a cookie, yes, I can get cookie. Now, this is a map which maps a cookie name with the corresponding cookie object, it is not the cookie name and the cookie value, it is a cookie name and the corresponding cookie object, fine. So, if you want to get the value of a cookie, but a value of a cookie with a particular name, fine, what you can do? You can say cookie in square bracket, because it is a map, fine. For map we use square bracket to access it. In square bracket you can just use in double quotes, give the name of the cookie name, square bracket over. So, that is my object of cookie, fine, and on that cookie I can say dot and I can just say value, because we have the method called, because what will be the type for cookie dot cookie and square bracket, when I put some cookie name, that string, it would be a string. When I put that, the type of object here is a cookie, and on cookie we have the get name and get value methods. So, I can say fine. So, we can always use this cookie square bracket, give a string which is the name of the cookie, and then dot you can say key to get the key of the cookie, which would be same thing, fine, as what you have passed, or you can say dot value, fine, or dot expiration. Fine. So, any attribute of the cookie can be accessed, fine. If you have a getter method, you can access that, fine. So, dot and yes, after this square bracket, then put a dot and fetch the corresponding property of the cookie also. fine. Cookie has name, value, those are the properties of cookie, fine. So, cookie is one particular map which is available. Okay. What else do we have? Fine. Okay. So, what we normally will also, so one is cookie, right. So, that is one implicit object. Another implicit object would be for getting hold of the init, let us say we want to know the context parameter, fine, any of those context parameters. So, we got this method called, we got this object called init param, fine. When we use this init param, yes, it can be used for accessing the initialization parameter of my application. So, init param is a map, it is a map of string with a string comma string, that is a map, fine. So, this init param, fine. So, in init param you give the name of the parameter name, and what you will be able to get is the corresponding parameter value, fine. So, that way we can fetch any initialization parameter which has been declared as context param in my web.xml file, fine. So, that is another thing which you can access from by using the init param, fine. Okay. When we have a request coming from the client, fine, because of course, when we have a JSP which is active, fine, there is a request which has already come from the client. So, when the request has come from the client, the request has got lot of headers, fine. Oh, we want to access the headers. So, we have a implicit object called header. When we use header, it is again a map which maps the header name with the header value, fine. So, it is a string with a string, fine. String would be header name, the corresponding it is, so key is the header name, the corresponding value object is the headers corresponding header value, fine. It may be giving you a null in case there is no such header available in the request, fine. Or another one, we understand that for the same header there can be multiple values, fine. So, we have one more object, one more implicit object available as header values. The header values is again a map. This maps the header name with multiple values. So, for the multiple values it has a string array. So, it is a mapping of string with string array. So, if you want, if you know that yes, there are multiple values for that header, you could always be using this particular object header values, fine. Okay. So, header values is one, and then of course, now let us talk of the other things which come in a request. Okay. Your request may be containing a parameter, fine, there are a lot of parameters which come. So, we have this called param, fine, we have got param. So, param is nothing but it is a map which is a mapping of a parameter name with the corresponding parameter value, fine. So, if you want to fetch any parameter from a request, it is simple, dollar braces the name of the parameter param dot the name of the parameter, fine, and that is it. You can just easily get your parameter, fine. Okay. Okay, it is a map, sorry, you will have to use square bracket, it is a map, fine, you do not access with dot, fine. Dot is only for property and not for map, fine. Param is a map. So, param square bracket and then you will give the in double quotes you give the name of the parameter for which you want the value. Again we understand that yes, when someone creates a form and he is submitting, yeah, he might have used same parameter name multiple places. So, we understand for a single parameter there might be multiple values which are mapped. So, if for the same parameter there are multiple values, fine, we can always say param values, that is the other object we have, fine. So, we have this object param values which is a mapping of string with a string array, fine. So, you have a string mapped to a string array. So, we have a string mapped to a string array, fine. So, coming to the next implicit object, fine. The next implicit object is our we have this object of type page context, fine. Page context is fine, it is nothing but our page context object, fine, which we have seen earlier in our earlier modules. We have seen what is a page context. Oh, page context in turn has the getter methods for getting the request object, the response object. So, page context, from that you can, it is a map, No, it is not a map here. So, you can it is just a implicit object. So, page context dot request, fine. So, page context dot response, or from page from the request, if I am interested in a particular thing. For example, I can say okay, page context dot request dot any of those getter methods which is there in the servlet request, fine. For example, content length, fine, request dot content length. Okay. So, page context dot request dot content length, and that can give me the content length, fine. So, that way you can use your implicit object called page context. Okay. Now, another thing, see, I had mentioned when I talked about using the objects from the scopes, any of those 4 scopes, we can use those objects directly. Dollar braces, it has to be an identifier. Or what if the attribute name is not a valid identifier? Fine. If someone has used an attribute name and he has used a space or maybe a hyphen, fine. Oh, we can't use we can't directly put dollar braces and put such a we can't fetch such an object straight away. Oh, for that reason, fine, to fetch object from any of the scopes for all the 4 scopes, fine, we have the page scope, request scope, we have the session scope, and we have the application scope. So, there are these 4 scopes, and these 4 scopes are available as map objects. It is a map of a string which is the name mapped to the corresponding map is fine, name corresponding, and to the name it is the corresponding object. So, the type here is the type of the attribute object which you have, fine. So, you will have, you can use these scope objects, fine. So, for example, dollar braces request scope dot request scope, and in square bracket, because it is a map we will use square bracket, fine. In double quotes I can give the name, and this name need not be a identifier, valid identifier kind. So, it is nothing but the attribute name, and some attribute, someone may have not set the attribute name to be a valid identifier, but still I would be able to access such objects by using these scope objects, fine. So, that is why we have these 4 scope objects also, fine. So, those were the implicit objects which are available in our expression language, fine. Okay. So, that is what we have in this particular module, fine. So, this module has mainly covered what is known as the expression language, but these are the things which will be very easily be used along with the Jstl, the standard tag library which we have, fine. The next module is going to be covering about mainly about the most commonly used tag library, fine. There are many things in the tag library, but we will be covering only those things which are most commonly used, fine. See, we will be following MVC pattern, and from that point of view we will be covering the things, fine. So, that is the thing for this module. Thank you. This module, thank you. This module, thank you. This module, thank you. This module, thank you.